Today I'm out here in the forest with the 2019 Mercedes-Benz S560 Coupe, the artist formerly known as the Mercedes CL. The S-Class Coupe, like the CL before it, is kind of an odd duck in the automotive industry because there's no natural competition. If you want a luxury two-door coupe and you want to spend between about $120,000 and about $250,000, this is basically your only option in the United States at this time. The S560 is significantly more expensive than the S-Class sedan. That starts at $91,250. This one starts at $125,950. So the air is definitely thinner up here with the S-Class Coupe. That makes entries like the BMW M850 look like a particularly good deal, starting at $111,000, or the Lexus LC starting at $92,000. But this is also a lot less expensive than a Bentley Continental. So depending on how you want to look at it, this could be either crazy expensive or a strangely good deal. Even though the S-Class Coupe has no natural competition, we're going to try and keep this in our regular review format. Up front we have LED headlamps, and this particular model has a very expensive option, an extra $1,750 for Swarovski crystal elements in the daytime running lamp strip that you're seeing right here in the headlamp module. These are their latest active LED headlamps, but they do a bit more if you're in Europe. In the United States we can't have some of the fancier Mercedes headlamp technologies. Down here we don't have any fog lamps, but we do have well-integrated parking sensors, and then behind this very large Mercedes logo lives the radar adaptive cruise control sensor. The model that we're looking at right here has the optional sport trim, so we get these extra little 3D elements going on in this grille. Overall, I think it's definitely a very handsome look. I think the overall style of the S-Class Coupe belies its actual size. At 198.9 inches long, this is a pretty big two-door vehicle in America. This is 8 inches longer than a BMW 8 Series, the brand new 8 Series, 7 inches longer than the Maserati GranTurismo, which in some ways would be the closest direct competitor to the model that we're looking at right here, the S560, and almost a full foot longer than the Lexus LC Coupe. In case you're wondering, that next price category up where the Bentley Continental GT plays, that's actually a little bit smaller than this. Even that model is going to be about 10 inches shorter than the S-Class overall. Out back, things change a little bit for the North American model. So you'll notice that we don't get amber turn signals like we find in Europe, and we have these little bumper sort of extensions right here in the license plate area in order to narrow this gap for the American format license plate. I actually wish that Mercedes had just left this opening alone and not inserted those little bumpers right there, and I also wish that we still had the amber turn signals in the tail lamp modules. But these tail lamps are really cool in their own right because these lamp modules have OLED elements. When you take a close look at the way these are formatted, it looks like they're little tiny slips of paper in there that are illuminated, and that's enabled by that OLED technology. The turn signal that you're seeing over there on that side, that's actually a more traditional standard LED blinking. Under the hood, you have your choice of two different 4-liter twin-turbo V8s or a twin-turbo V12 if none of those is quite crazy enough. The model that we're looking at today is the least powerful. It's a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that produces 463 horsepower and a whopping 516 pound-feet of torque. It sends power to all four wheels by default via a 9-speed automatic transmission. Yes, all-wheel drive is standard in actually most versions of the S-Class Coupe now. If we work our way on up into the AMG line, we then have a different 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that produces 603 horsepower, 664 pound-feet of torque, and that is mated to a slightly different transmission but still has all-wheel drive. In the AMG trims of the S-Class, Mercedes uses what they refer to as an MCT or multi-clutch transmission. This is kind of an interesting semantic with Mercedes here. Technically, any automatic transmission is a multi-clutch transmission because they all have multiple clutches inside. So it's not like they use a 9-speed dual-clutch transmission like you find in other performance vehicles out there. They use basically the same 9-speed automatic transmission as this one, only they remove the torque converter. That's really the only major change there. That helps improve overall shift firmness, shift speed, etc., and it reduces a little bit of parasitic loss, but it does remove the one element in the transmission that makes shifts smooth. So if you're worried about absolute smoothness, you want the S560. If you want the absolute performance, you want the S63. Then of course there is the S65, which uses a 6-liter twin-turbo V12 under this hood that produces 621 horsepower and 783 pound-feet of torque. Now, in order to mate that transmission to this vehicle, they've had to go down to a 7-speed automatic instead of the 9-speed because apparently the 9-speed just wouldn't be able to handle the power. Mercedes has indicated that they're going to start discontinuing the 6-liter V12, however, from their lineup. We don't know if it's going to be replaced by another V12 at some point later, but we do know that its days are numbered at this point. That engine is mated not to the 9-speed, but instead to a 7-speed DCT. As you'd expect out of an expensive luxury vehicle, these front seats contort in a wide variety of different ways. We have extending thigh cushions, inflatable bolsters, active bolsters that inflate as you turn into corners. These seats also feature active massage in the model that we're driving right here, seat heating and ventilation. We have a powered tilt telescopic steering column that's also heated, and the driver and front passenger seat have the same range of motion. In terms of overall seat comfort and seat motion, this definitely exceeds what we see in what is probably the closest competitor at this price point, the Maserati GranTurismo. Even though this car is very large for a two-door vehicle, we don't really have that much room in the rear because the S-Class Coupe is all about the folks up front with a usable emergency back seat. At 6 feet tall, I have a reasonable amount of headroom, about as much headroom as I have in the average family sedan these days, meaning my head is still touching the ceiling. Legroom is really where things get a little bit more limited. If I have this front seat come back into place where I was sitting at it comfortably, it is definitely crushing my legs down there. My knees are definitely dug into the seat. Now it is carved in a little bit nicely right there, so that way it's not too tight, but it's definitely small back here, and there is no center seat. It's a 4-seat vehicle only. Things are definitely done nicely back here. We have some storage compartments, air vents back here, a fold down center armrest. Like the CL before it, the S-Class Coupe has an interesting design touch where we don't have a B-pillar. So if I were to roll down the front and rear windows, you'll notice that there's nothing right here to obstruct my view outside of the vehicle, or just if you want to stick your arm right back there. It's really an interesting design touch. So we have this one continuous arc across the vehicle. Now it is worth noting that for some reason there are no window switches back here in the rear passenger area, so all that motion has to actually be done from the driver's side control panel because even the front passenger cannot control the window behind them. Cargo capacity is pretty good for a luxury two-door vehicle. Back here we have over 14 cubic feet of storage space. That is a little bit less than the sedan, but about double what we find in the convertible. Now personally, the convertible version of the S-Class is my favorite because you can still fit just about enough luggage back here for 2 people to go away for a weekend. This S-Class Coupe, however, has definitely more storage room available. You can definitely line up a number of these 22-inch roller bags back there and then stick some up front as well. But this cargo area is just a little bit smaller than the sedans. If we lift up the cargo area load floor, we don't find a spare tire under here. This is actually where Mercedes locates the subwoofer. The model that we're driving this week has the fairly expensive optional Burmeister sound system. So we have a Burmeister speaker right here near the controls for this large panoramic moonroof. Now this moonroof does not open, it is just a fixed sheet of glass. And this particular model does not have the magic sky option, so it does not tilt. But you can see it's very large, goes just over to the driver and front passenger's heads, even when the seats are all the way back. You can see again that lack of B-pillar going on right there in the cabin, and another Burmeister speaker right there by the passenger side seat belt. If you're debating between the coupe and the cabriolet, which I think is a pretty tough choice, I would tend to prefer the cabriolet. It actually is just about as roomy and just about as quiet inside. And the overall style and overall feeling is very similar, since the coupe again doesn't have that B-pillar right there. These are the optional Designo seats in this model. They are both heated and ventilated, and they massage. We move over to the front doors, we find a lot of soft touch materials and of course real wood trim up there towards the air vent. Mercedes loves to put the seat controls on the doors. That's where we find it in this vehicle as well. In addition to electric adjustable headrest and the extending thigh cushion, we get 3-position seat memory, heating and ventilation controls right there on the door. Again, more Burmeister speakers, and you'll find the lumbar seat controls in the infotainment system rather than over here on the door. The overall interior styling definitely harmonizes with the S-Class sedan, but isn't exactly the same. We have a leather-stitched dashboard right here in the red section that goes all the way down there to the bottom of the console. We have a somewhat small-sized glove compartment right here. It is a slot style. I was not able to fit some of the larger tablet computers inside, but again, everything down there is leather, including that glove compartment door. Then in the dashboard, from this angle, you can see that we have 2 12.3-inch LCDs running right across the dash, one for the instrument cluster and then one for the infotainment system. 2019 does not bring us Mercedes' latest infotainment system, which we see in some of their brand new models, but we do get the latest version of their previous generation system. That features smartphone integration, as you can see right here, and multiple different ways of interacting with the system. You can control the screen via this touchpad right here, the rotary knob that is right in front of it that rotates around, toggles side to side, clicks down to enter, or this BlackBerry-like touch sensor that's right over here on the steering wheel. So you can see I can move my finger side to side, up and down, and I can control everything in the system from the Apple CarPlay interface right there to the native Mercedes interface with my finger right over here on the steering wheel. This is a little bit tricky to use. It does take some getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, it does result in not having to have your hands off the wheel for as long. Below the infotainment screen, we have 4 large air vents. They're controllable in pairs. These are the knobs to open and close the vents. And then we have the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system. The zones are almost entirely independent of one another, so if you want one side completely off and the other side still active, you can do that in this system. If we hit the menu button over here, then we can explore some of the other options for the climate control system within the infotainment control. As we see in other high-end luxury vehicles, there are a lot of choices when it comes to the overall climate control function. For instance, the driver and passenger separately can choose between very direct air, which would be focused mainly on these vents right here in front of the driver and front passenger, or whether you want your experience to be a little bit more diffuse, where the car will use air vents around the cabin, including one right up here on top of this area, so that way it's not constantly blowing right on you. You can also adjust your footwell temperature if that's something that you're interested in. Below that area, we have a pop-out ashtray with 12-volt power port, and then a pull-down area where we have 2 decently sized cup holders and a 12-volt power port. There's also a very small storage cubby where you can't quite put smartphones. Going into the center console a little bit more closely, we again have those 2 different control methods for the Mercedes command system. We then have a direct access button to the seat features within the infotainment system that allows us to adjust the dynamic seat, the lumbar control, the massage, etc. Direct access buttons to navigation, radio, media, telephone interface, and vehicle settings, along with the hazard light button right there. This toggle controls the adaptive air suspension. We can choose between Eco, Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, and an individual mode. We can enable and disable the engine start-stop system. Since this does have an adaptive air suspension system, we can raise and lower the vehicle. And then you'll find the power and volume knob over here on the right side, along with a button to drop the rear headrests. Taking a closer look at the instrument cluster LCD screen, that's controlled via another BlackBerry-style control wheel over on the left side of the steering wheel instead of the right side. That allows us to control the various quadrants of this screen right here. So you can see I can scroll through the options over there on the right side. I can then flick over to the left. I can then change through some of the options there, or enter a menu and select what I want to see over there on that left side of the screen. So for instance, if I wanted the navigation over there, I could choose that option right there. I could choose media information, phone information, etc. This is also where we would change the overall look and feel of this center display. You can choose between 3 different themes. There is a sport theme, there's a more classic theme right there, and then there's the progressive theme, which we saw earlier. If you get the optional night vision system, then the display for that optional IR camera is right here in the middle of this panel. The steering wheel in this particular model has a split bottom spoke. It is heated. We have leather on the sides and then wood for the rest of the rim of the wheel. On the back of the steering wheel, we have paddle shifters. They're fairly small, so you can't really see them from this angle. We again have that control for the infotainment screen over here on the right, and then the instrument cluster screen over here on the left. The left side is also where we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, and then on the right side we find the rotary knob for the volume, phone hang-up and pickup buttons, and then a toggle for voice command, and then favorites within that Mercedes infotainment system. To the left side of the steering wheel, we find an additional bank of controls. This is where we find the button to enable and disable the steering assist system, lane keeping assist. We then have the night vision button, a button to raise and lower the rear sunshade, and then a button to extend the seat belt for the driver's side of the vehicle that makes it a little bit easier to grab it. If this car had the heads-up display, then you'd see some additional controls over there. Clearly, the first thing you'll notice is the acceleration out on the road. 0 to 60 happens in this model in 4 seconds flat. That's extremely good for a vehicle that weighs 4,800 pounds without a driver in it. Remember that all-wheel drive is standard in the S560, and again, this is one of the larger entries in this segment. If you want to go faster than this in your S-Class, you can certainly do that. If you get an S63, that's actually going to be the fastest version of this. That will go 0 to 60 nearly a full second faster at 3.2 seconds 0 to 60. Oddly enough, the most powerful engine option, which is the bi-turbo V12, is actually a little bit slower than that because it's a little bit heavier. A nice touch in the S560 and the S63 is that all-wheel drive becomes standard, and that makes it an awful lot easier to do standing line launches because you don't have any worries about traction or stability when you just want to floor the vehicle at a stoplight, for instance. So even if we're out here on this country road, for instance, and we came to a complete stop, and I were just to romp on the throttle, it's just absolute no drama, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. That's actually the best way to describe the S-Class all the way around. This is the kind of car that has a distinct aversion to drama. The ride is just very smooth, the cabin is very quiet, everything is very, very controlled. Handling is absolutely excellent for a vehicle that weighs this much, and there's really just no drama about anything going on in this car. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, even in this base model, is faster than many sports cars out there, but we're driving a very large Mercedes Coupe. When it comes to absolute handling numbers, it's important to remember the mission of the S-Class. This is designed to be a luxury car first, a stylish two-door coupe second, and a performance vehicle probably about third or so, even when we're talking about the AMG models. So if you want better handling, you will find that in some of the competition. For instance, the BMW M850 will handle better than this S560 here, but the overall mission of the car is quite different. Now that said, this still handles absolutely impeccably, so I'm going to give this an A- when it comes to absolute grip. The overall steering feel is a little bit vague. It's a little bit difficult to tell exactly what all the tires are up to, but when you start pushing this car harder, it definitely picks up its lederhosen and starts to dance. The main benefit to the active air suspension that we find in the S-Class vehicles is that it gives us a very, very compliant ride, whether we're out on the open highway or whether we're on a rougher surface like we're on right here. We also have the high ride height mode, where we can actually raise the suspension up, just like you find in something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee, to give us even more ground clearance for larger obstacles. As we see in most vehicles with adaptive air suspensions, if this is at its maximum ride height, the ride quality does diminish a little bit, so you want to keep this most of the time in its standard ride height mode. Back out on the open road, again, the ride is definitely noticeable because this has a very smooth feel whether we're riding over large or small imperfections out on the road. But one thing I did notice is that when we're going over smaller bumps, especially like these box dots that are here on the road that I'm deliberately running over, you can hear a bit of a thump into the cabin, and that surprised me a little bit because overall this cabin is very quiet. In our cabin noise test, we scored 68 decibels at 50 miles an hour, making this one of the quietest cabins we've ever tested. But I think because of that absolute vault-like cabin, there are a few sounds that come through a little bit strangely. Giving a fuel economy score to something that's this large and this performance-oriented is a little bit tricky, but it's made even trickier in our style of comparisons because we don't really have too much to compare this to. So when it comes to our overall fuel economy score, I'm going to give this a question mark. Now, over a week of mixed driving, we have been averaging an impressive 24 miles per gallon, which is pretty good considering, again, how large, powerful, and heavy this is. If you wanted something that's a little bit more economy focused, you could get the hybrid coupe from Lexus, but it plays in a very different arena versus this model. It's an awful lot less expensive, it doesn't feel as premium inside the cabin or out on the road. One of the benefits to the Mercedes coupe line is that they have a complete line of coupes, convertibles, and roadsters that other manufacturers simply don't. So we have a C-Class coupe, an E-Class coupe, an S-Class coupe, we have C, E, and S-Class convertibles, and then we have their complete line of roadsters. The rumor mill is telling us not to expect the SL to return for 2020, but even if Mercedes kills that model, they still have so many more coupes, convertibles, roadsters, etc. to compete in the luxury segment. Their competition ends up trying to compete with multiple different Mercedes models at the same time. For instance, you could logically say that the BMW 8 Series is a competitor to the E-Class and the S-Class simultaneously, and Audi doesn't really have anything that plays in this price category. That has allowed Mercedes to craft vehicles that have very distinct personalities. The E-Class is definitely the sportier coupe and cabriolet. The S-Class is definitely a lot larger, a lot softer, feeling a lot more comfortable, and a lot more premium as well. The Mercedes S-Class coupe is either fantastically expensive or, oddly enough, a screaming deal, depending on how you want to look at it. The reason for that is that it's a tweener vehicle. It actually sits right between most luxury two-door coupes and the ultra-luxury, ultra-expensive coupes that we see from Rolls Royce, Bentley, etc. The S560 starts at $125,950, and the model that we were driving had some options on it, so it was definitely more expensive than that. If you want an S63 AMG, the least expensive AMG, that will set you back at least $169,450, and if you want an S65, that starts just shy of $250,000 at $241,000, and it will run all the way on up to $271,000 if you get a little carried away with the options. If you think that's expensive, then consider the fact that the convertible is about $7,000 more, depending on exactly how you have it configured. That means that the S-Class coupe is quite simply in an entirely different category than something like an Audi R8. The R8 is just not the same thing, and it can't get as expensive as an S-Class coupe either. In fact, the brand Audi just doesn't make anything as expensive as the S-Class models can get. Now that's quite logical because Volkswagen, of course, owns Bentley. But the Bentley Continental is not quite the same thing either, because it starts at $218,400, about $100,000 more than a base Mercedes-Benz S-Class. But the next step down the rung in the Audi lineup would be something like an Audi A5, and that starts, $70,000 less than the S560. If you want a Bentley Continental, that will start at a startling $236,000, so again, not quite the same thing as the Mercedes. I do think that the Continental is more attractive. It also is a little bit sportier. Performance overall is very good in that model, and there's a much higher level of customization, obviously a higher level of brand prestige associated with that Bentley as well. But if my money were on the line, if I had that kind of money, I would probably buy the S-Class instead, because I think it's a better deal, and I just like the overall feel of the Mercedes. It's big, it's comfortable. I really love the way that the S-Class drives. Comparisons are also similarly tricky over on the BMW side, because the BMW M850 starts at $111,000. Expensive to be sure, but not in the same category as the S-Class. Even if you got carried away with options on your M850, you'd be hard-pressed to get that model on up to the price tag of our lightly equipped tester this week. The reason for that, of course, is that BMW owns Rolls Royce, and if you would like a Rolls Royce Wraith, which would be the approximate corollary to the S-Class Coupe, they'll charge you at least $320,000 for that model. So you can see, again, the S-Class slots right there between an M850 and the Rolls Royce Wraith, which is fantastically expensive. Again, not the same kind of customization ability, etc., but significantly less expensive. Probably the only model in the luxury segment that is in the same sort of price tag right here is the Maserati GranTurismo. It starts a little bit higher at $134,000, but doesn't continue as high as the S-Class. It only goes on up to about $170,000 or so. The overall character of the vehicle is still not the same thing, however. The Maserati is trying to be a sportier vehicle, and it's also trying to be the Italian alternative to something like the Bentley Continental in some ways. There's an incredibly high level of customization ability in the GranTurismo if you wanted to order one, but the overall feel of the vehicle isn't quite as modern as what we find in the Mercedes. This may sound strange, but overall performance is actually a little bit disappointing in some ways in the GranTurismo as well. The engines sound absolutely incredible, but actual 0 to 60 performance falls behind some of the mid-level versions of the S-Class Coupe. Bottom lining, the S-Class almost sounds a little bit silly because there really isn't much to compare it to, and I think if you're looking to spend $150,000 or $160,000 on your next two-door coupe, you're going to either look at something like the S-Class, or you're going to be looking at a very sporty two-door coupe, something like a Porsche 911, some of those flavors, something like that, perhaps an Acura NSX. These are very different vehicles than the Mercedes, but the Mercedes S-Class Coupe on its own has really no direct corollary in the luxury market. If you're looking for something along these lines, my personal recommendation would be spend the extra, get the convertible. It's a very quiet vehicle, and I love the convertible top. And of course, I just love the S-Class in general. The sedan's very comfortable, the convertible's very comfortable, and the coupe is comfortable as well. So if your budget runs this deep, run out and buy one. If it doesn't, I'm very sorry about that, but perhaps you might be able to afford something like an Audi R8. With that out of the way, be sure and check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/AlexNautos so you can see what I'm driving this week. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, and I will see you next week.